The candle flickered in the hush of a dimly lit room. A man, aged and weathered by years of love, conflict, and perseverance, sat quietly at a wooden table. The ink brush trembled slightly between his fingers, not from weakness, but from the gravity of what he would write. They called him the elder now. No longer the fiery young disciple who ran to the tomb, or the one who reclined near the teacher at supper. He had become something deeper, a shepherd of truth, a father in the faith. His words no longer chased crowds or provoked debates. Instead, they were quieter, weightier, more deliberate, like an old tree whose roots reached deep and wide. He leaned forward, dipped his brush in ink, and began. The elder unto the well-beloved Gaius, whom I love in the truth. His heart warmed even as he formed the name, Gaius. Not just a disciple. Not just a friend. A well-beloved one. A man whose life had become a living testimony to the truth he claimed to follow. In the shadow of turmoil and pride infecting some in the early church, Gaius stood as a beacon of humble steadfastness. John paused, his eyes scanning the open window, where morning light stretched softly across the floor. He remembered the faces, young converts, weary travelers, messengers with dust-covered cloaks, who had passed through Gaius' home and left uplifted. And so the elder wrote again. Beloved, I wish above all things that thou mayest prosper and be in health, even as thy soul prospereth. It was more than a greeting. It was a father's prayer. That the body of this faithful man would thrive just as his inner life already did. Because in Gaius, the elder saw something rare in those days, spiritual maturity that wasn't loud or showy, but grounded, fruitful, quietly powerful. John smiled faintly to himself. His thoughts drifted back to earlier days, when the church was new and every step forward came with risk. Now, many years later, he had seen empires rise and crumble, false teachers twist the gospel, and former brothers fall into bitterness or pride. Yet here was Gaius, holding fast. This letter would be different. It was not written to a whole congregation. It bore no sweeping theological declarations. It was personal, intimate. A word from one who had seen the beginning, to one who was now carrying the flame forward. The elder shifted in his seat. His bones ached, but his spirit burned. He remembered how Christ had once prayed, not just for the disciples, but for those who would believe through their message. That they might be one, not in theory, but in love, in truth, in action. Gaius lived that prayer. John looked down at the parchment, fingers steady once more. The ink was drying now on his first words, but the heart of the letter had yet to unfold. He knew what he must address, the joy he felt in hearing of Gaius' faithfulness, the beauty of those who walked in truth, and the shadows cast by others whose hearts had hardened. But for now, this moment belonged to affection, to recognition, to love. Because long before rebuke or instruction, there must be honor. The fire crackled behind him. Somewhere in the distance, a rooster cried. The elder's lips moved without sound, his heart praying as he wrote, for the beloved Gaius, for the church, for the truth that bound them across distance and time. The ink dried. The first strokes had been made. And across the parchment, beneath the dim light of a fading sun, a name shone like gold. Gaius, whom I love in the truth. The elder's hand moved steadily now, each stroke carrying the weight of joy. He had heard the report. Not from rumors, not from whispers, but from faithful messengers. Brothers in the faith who had passed through Gaius' doors and walked away changed, encouraged, strengthened. And so the elder wrote, For I rejoiced greatly, when the brethren came and testified of the truth that is in thee, even as thou walkest in the truth. He paused. Rejoiced greatly. The words weren't mere politeness, they were honest, deep. A joy that stirred in his bones, a rejoicing that bubbled up from decades of watching souls rise and fall. He had seen plenty who started well but faded when tested. He had watched others grow enamored with power or flattery. But Gaius had done more than speak truth. He walked in it. It was the walk that mattered. Not the declarations. Not the polished answers or religious bravado. The truth was in him, and it was evident in the way he moved, how he treated guests, how he gave without fanfare, how he clung to what was right even when no one else was watching. John could see it clearly in his mind. Dusty feet stepping across the threshold of Gaius' home, weary brothers offered bread and rest, their stories heard without judgment, their spirits lifted by the kindness of one who lived what he believed. In those small acts of devotion, the truth walked too. And John rejoiced. He had known the Master, heard the voice that calmed seas, watched hands that broke loaves for thousands. He had seen truth himself walk the earth. And now, in a younger man, he saw the same footsteps echoing forward. The old man leaned back, heart swelling. There were few things left in this world that brought him such gladness. The days were darker now. Rome tightened its grip. Wolves crept into the folds of the church, wearing the skin of sheep. Pride swelled in some hearts, and love grew cold in others. But here in the quiet faithfulness of Gaius, there was light. John returned to his writing. I have no greater joy than to hear that my children walk in truth. There it was, his confession. His heart, exposed. No greater joy. Not in fame. Not in reputation. Not even in miracles. But in this, that those he had poured into, wept over, prayed for, were still walking in the truth. Children. That was how he saw them, not as followers or fans, but as beloved offspring of faith. Gaius was one of many, yet unique in his obedience. And John, though aged and far away, felt every step Gaius took as if it were his own. The letter continued to form, but the elder's mind lingered on the testimony of those travelling brothers. They had come to him speaking of Gaius, not in awe of wealth or influence, but with reverence for character. They told of how he welcomed them not only with bread, but with warmth. Not only with shelter, but with love. They marveled that though he barely knew them, he treated them as family. That was what the truth looked like. Not a set of doctrines recited by heart, but a heart shaped by the truth. A life aligned with the ways of God. John could almost hear the brothers' voices, speaking with gratitude. He listens. He cares. He strengthens us. And John knew, Gaius' hospitality was not small. It was the very heartbeat of the gospel. Because love, real love, cost something. And Gaius paid it gladly. The old apostle let his brush rest for a moment. His eyes grew damp, not with sorrow, but with a joy that could only come from seeing faith endure. So many had drifted. So many had faltered. But not Gaius. He walks. The elder whispered the words to himself. In a world shaken by heresy and division, where pride sought pulpits and flatterers sought favor, it was no small thing to walk in truth. It was a daily decision. A quiet resistance. A long obedience. The candle beside him flickered. The ink pot was half empty, but the fire within the elder's heart glowed brighter than ever. Because in Gaius, he saw hope. In Gaius, he saw the church as it was meant to be. Not a building, not a hierarchy, but a living witness. A man who carried the truth not only in scrolls, but in scars, in service, in silence. John dipped the brush again, ready for what came next. But before he moved on, he looked once more at the line he had just written. I have no greater joy. It wasn't just a compliment. It was a legacy. The elder was passing the torch, not with ceremony or crowds, but with ink and truth, from one faithful soul to another. And the flame still burned. The elder's brush returned to the parchment. His tone shifted now, not in love, for love remained, but in purpose. There was something sacred he needed to affirm. something the modern church could not afford to forget. It was the forgotten ministry of those who travel for the sake of the name. Those who carry the gospel on foot, relying not on wages, but on the faithfulness of fellow believers. So he began again, this time with praise forged in eternal truth. Beloved, thou doest faithfully whatsoever thou doest to the brethren, and to strangers. There was a rhythm to those words, a heartbeat of heaven pulsing through them. Gaius had become a quiet pillar in a noisy time. Not only had he extended kindness to those he knew, but even to strangers, wandering missionaries, unknown evangelists, nameless men who knocked with little more than a testimony on their lips and dust on their feet. And still, Gaius opened his door. Still, he welcomed. Still, he served. John could see it all in his mind. He imagined a weary traveler standing hesitantly before Gaius' home, cloak torn, voice hoarse, unsure if he would be received. And then the door creaking open, warm light spilling into the night, and Gaius' gentle voice, "You are welcome here, brother." To the world, it might have seemed small, but in the kingdom of God, it echoed loud, "Which have borne witness of thy charity before the church." John remembered the men who had returned. Their faces had softened when they spoke of Gaius. There was awe in their voices, not for grand gestures or wealth, but for simple, sacred generosity. They said his charity wasn't forced. It wasn't performative. It flowed from the truth within him. It was not just what he gave. It was how he gave. With joy. With grace. Without condition. They spoke of the meals he offered. The nights he stayed up to pray with them. The care he showed their wounds. The way he listened, not to judge, but to understand. And all of it was done as unto the Lord. John's lips curved into a small smile as he wrote, "Whom if thou bring forward on their journey after a godly sort, thou shalt do well." To bring forward, to help, to send, to bless, to equip Gaius wasn't just offering a place to sleep. He was participating in the mission. He was sending them, preparing them to go further, to reach deeper into enemy territory, to proclaim truth where it had not yet been heard. In the eyes of heaven, Gaius was not merely a host. He was a collaborator, a fellow worker. John's tone now took on gravity, a reminder to any who would read this letter in the years to come. Because that for his name's sake they went forth, taking nothing of the Gentiles. These men had not gone out seeking profit. They had not charged the lost for truth. They had asked nothing from the Gentiles, not money, not shelter. They walked by faith, not marketing. They preached the name, not themselves. And so it fell to the church, the family of believers, to uphold them. John had seen the danger of forgetting this. He had watched as the world began to infiltrate the sacred, as the line blurred between ministry and ambition, as men who once walked in sandals now strutted with pride. But not Gaius, and not these brothers. They went forth for the name's sake, not their own. The name that healed the lame. The name that calmed storms. The name that was whispered in secret and shouted in synagogues. The name above all names. They went for him. And because of that, they took nothing from the world. They trusted the people of God to supply what they lacked. The elder dipped the brush once more, now writing with a clarity sharpened by decades of discernment. We therefore ought to receive such, that we might be fellow helpers to the truth. Fellow helpers. The word hung in the room like incense. It meant something deeper than support. It meant ownership, partnership, responsibility. To receive these messengers was not just charity, it was unity with the mission. To house them, feed them, pray with them, was to share in the victories and sufferings of the gospel. Gaius had understood this. And in doing so, he had become something rare. Not a preacher, not an apostle, not a prophet, but a bridge, a lifeline, a partner in the story that heaven was still writing. John stared at the ink drying on the parchment. His hands trembled, not with fatigue, but with urgency. He knew this letter would outlive him. Others would read it. Others would wrestle with what it meant to receive strangers, to give without expecting return, to send forth messengers for the sake of the name. And if they followed the example of Gaius, they too would become fellow workers. Because the truth could not spread on its own. It needed feet to carry it, hands to uphold it, homes to shelter it, hearts to believe in it. It needed Gaius. And it needed others like him. The elder sat back, eyes damp with gratitude. Not all battles were fought on public stages. Some were fought in kitchens, on doorsteps, beside candlelight. And some victories came quietly, like a stranger welcomed in love, a meal shared in faith, a journey made possible by one man's simple obedience. The world might never know Gaius. But heaven did. And the truth would go forward, because of men like him. The ink turned darker now. The elder's hand slowed. His heart remained steady, but the tone of the letter shifted. Still soaked in love, but now sharpened by grief. There was something that could not be left unspoken. A wound among the people of God. A name that brought not joy, but sorrow. He dipped the brush again and began with a sigh. I wrote unto the church, but Diotrephes, who loveth to have the preeminence among them, receiveth us not. There it was. A fracture. The name Diotrephes carved its place into the page, not as a brother to commend, but as a man to remember with caution. A man who had allowed ambition to strangle love, who had traded the humility of Christ for the throne of self. He loves to have the preeminence. That was the root. Not simple disagreement. Not doctrinal confusion. But preeminence. He wanted to be first. Above the others. Elevated. Seen. Praised. He wanted control, not to serve the church, but to rule it. And in his hunger for power, Diotrephes had rejected not only John's authority, but the truth itself. The elder had seen this before. He had watched pride poison the hearts of once faithful men. Watched egos inflate and ministries collapse. Watched shepherds forget the sheep and chase their own crowns. But this cut deeper. Diotrephes did not only reject apostolic authority. He did not simply refuse hospitality. He shut the door on the very men who carried the gospel. And worse, he led others to do the same. John leaned forward, eyes narrowing as the next line formed with conviction. Wherefore, if I come, I will remember his deeds which he doeth. There was no malice in those words, only clarity. If the Lord permitted, the elder would confront this cancer. Not with rage, but with truth. The kind that exposes. The kind that purifies. The kind that makes proud men tremble. Prating against us with malicious words. John could still hear the echo of slander, the twisting of truth, the whisper campaigns in back rooms. Diotrephes used words like weapons, subtle, poisonous, designed to turn hearts against the apostles, to sever the church from its foundations. And he did not stop at words. And not content therewith, neither doth he himself receive the brethren, and forbiddeth them that would, and casteth them out of the church. This was no private offence. Diotrephes had crossed a sacred line. He not only refused the faithful workers of the gospel, he punished those who tried to do right. He forbade others from showing hospitality. And when they defied him, he cast them out. Out of the church. The very place that was meant to be a refuge had become a court. The house of God had become a stage for ego. Diotrephes had turned unity into division, and service into control. The elder's chest tightened. Not with fear, but with righteous sorrow. He knew what was at stake. This was more than a personality clash. This was a spirit that threatened the integrity of the church. The same pride that had once divided the angels now festered in a man who called himself a leader. And the cost was eternal. John took a breath. He had seen many faces over the decades, faces of martyrs, of missionaries, of mothers who wept over the lost. He had heard the cries of the persecuted and held the hands of those dying for the faith. But nothing grieved him more than this. When the danger came not from outside the church, but from within. And so, with a steady hand, he exposed the truth. He did not slander Diotrephes as Diotrephes had slandered him. He simply told the truth, and let that truth speak louder than vengeance. There would be a reckoning. Not by sword, not by threat, but by light. Because darkness always fears the light. And the light had not gone out. The elder leaned back. His face weathered, but his spirit unbroken. He did not write these words to retaliate, but to protect, to preserve, to warn, so that Gaius, and those like him, would not grow weary, would not shrink back, would not be fooled into thinking that men like Diotrephes had the final word. Because they did not. Truth would, and love would, and heaven would. John could almost hear the words of Jesus ringing in his soul, words he had heard with his own ears, all those years ago. The greatest among you shall be your servant. Diotrephes had forgotten, but Gaius had not. And as long as there were still men like Gaius, men who walked in truth, welcomed the brothers, and stood their ground, then the church would endure. And the gate of hell would not prevail against it. The elder's hand returned to the parchment, this time, not with correction, but with a father's final guidance. The storm had been named. The pride of Diotrephes exposed. But John would not end in conflict. The story of the church, of faith, of truth, must not be remembered by the shadows. It must be remembered by the light that still burned. So he wrote with warmth once again, his voice steady, his heart reaching across the distance. Beloved, follow not that which is evil, but that which is good. It was not just a warning. It was a plea. John had lived long enough to know that men become what they follow. The church had no shortage of personalities, some dazzling, some dangerous. But John urged Gaius to look deeper, to discern not the loudest voice, but the truest spirit, to follow what is good. Because truth was not just a doctrine to be believed, it was a path to be walked. And good was not just what sounded noble, but what bore fruit that lasted. He that doeth good is of God, but he that doeth evil hath not seen God. The elder's hand paused on those words. He that doeth good is of God. Not he who talks well. Not he who boasts of visions or titles. But he who does good. The evidence of divine life is not found in position, but in practice. And Gaius had done good. So had another. John now turned to a different name. Not Diotrephes, whose memory would stain the parchment, but one whose name deserved honor. Demetrius hath good report of all men, and of the truth itself. Demetrius. John didn't offer many words. He didn't need to. His name was known, not just by the people, but by the truth itself. The very truth testified on his behalf. His life, like Gaius, was a letter written not with ink, but with deeds. Yea, and we also bear record, and ye know that our record is true. John put his seal on it. A triple testimony, from the people, from the truth, and from the elder himself. In a world where accusations flew like arrows, where trust was eroded by selfish ambition, a good name like Demetrius was more than rare, it was holy. John knew what he was doing. He was pointing Gaius to others like him. Brothers whose lives could be trusted. Whose witness had stood the test of time. Because the church must not only rebuke the Diotrepheses of the world, but uplift the Demetriuses. To follow what is good means to follow those whose lives reflect the heart of God. The ink began to run low now. The elder's strength was fading, but his spirit remained fierce. He had said what must be said, and now it was time to close. But not with finality, with longing. I had many things to write, but I will not with ink and pen write unto thee. There was more on his heart. Pages unwritten, thoughts unspoken, warnings and hopes, blessings and burdens. But sometimes, letters fall short. Sometimes, the truest communion cannot be sealed in scrolls, but in the clasp of hands, in the embrace of fellowship. So John promised what ink could not replace. But I trust one shall shortly see thee, and we shall speak face to face. The Greek said it best, mouth to mouth. A closeness beyond parchment. The reunion of kindred spirits. The joy of hearts knit by truth, unshaken by distance or time. John had seen empires fall and churches rise. He had felt betrayal and witnessed miracles. But he still longed, not for position or praise, but for fellowship. Because this was the beating heart of the gospel. Not just doctrine, but love. He set the final words gently onto the page. Peace be to thee. Our friends salute thee. Greet the friends by name. Peace. Not just quiet, but wholeness. Shalom. In a world that offered little of it, John sent it freely. And then, one final touch. He did not say the church. He said the friends. This wasn't about an institution. It wasn't about structure. It was about people. Real people. Friends bound by truth. Brothers and sisters who stood side by side through storms and slander, through persecution and praise. And he told Gaius to greet them. By name. Because God does not forget names. And neither should we. The candle burned low. The elder rolled up the scroll, hands trembling slightly with the tenderness of parting. He had written what he must. He had pointed to what mattered. Not ego. Not control. Not position. But truth. And love. And the testimony that endures. The book of 3 John ends not in controversy, but in a quiet call to faithfulness. Though Diotrephes casts out, and others rise to dominate, still the truth walks on, in homes like Gaius, in hearts like Demetrius, and in letters written by weary hands that refuse to grow silent. The church endures not by the power of men, but by the love of friends, the courage of the faithful, and the truth that never dies. This is the end. If you found this video valuable, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. It helps share God's word with more people. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on all notifications so you never miss out on powerful biblical teachings. Thanks for watching, and until next time, God bless.